consecration be considered a prince in the Lord's church. That's not just black church talk. That's not something we made up to try to give our egos some massage or some lift or boost. It's real. It's so real that in the United States and most countries and nations, there is need for what we call precedence, Precedence. As a nation, we receive dignitaries from around the world on an hour-by-hour basis. And the bishop, the role of the bishop and the office is so respected that within the precedence of this nation, its protocol, there is written how a bishop should be received. If the government gets it, certainly the church needs to get it. Because we are called firstly to the faithful, and then thusly we are assigned to the world to be an example of Jesus Christ in the earth. And so we must be clear about how the world sees this office. And if we will tie that into how we handle the bishop, we will discover how we have sometimes missed the significance of having the bishop in our midst. This house will go to a new level as you continue to grow, as you continue to evolve, as you continue to embrace the fullness of the vision God has given your pastor. This church goes to a new level because now seated here is the bishop. One of the first points that I'd like to make is wherever the bishop sits, it becomes a cathedral. I want you to write that down because that's imperative. It becomes a cathedral. As a matter of fact, the chair the bishop sits in is commonly referred to as a cathedra, C-A-T-H-E-D-R-A. And the cathedra sits in the cathedral. If you ever travel to some of our larger cities, even I'm sure downtown Raleigh and some of the major cathedrals, if you were to have access and to tour those facilities. I'm thinking about New York City, and whenever I'm in New York, I make it my business to go by some of the major cathedrals there so that I can observe not just the liturgy, their worship style, but also their reverence for the office. The bishop's cathedra is generally seated off to the side, elevated, not because we worship the bishop, but because there is reverence for the office. You want to make that a part of your notes. We are going to learn how to reverence the office so that no matter who sits in the seat, we will always be respectful of those who have been assigned as overseers, as chief shepherds. I've watched your pastor serve in various capacities within the church. He did not wake up one day and decide he wanted to become this. That is a point that you want to acknowledge, because in a day where there are so many people erroneously ascending to offices, you ought to thank God that you've got a leader who waited on the appointment. It's worth clapping for. He did not get this because of his name. He has ascended here because of his works and his service to the body of Christ and to the church. Just by way of history, and I'll throw this out, and Bishop can hurry me along if I stay stuck on any point too long, because I'm passionate about this. There are only two ways one can become a bishop when it is correctly done. Now, some people eat pinto beans and collard greens and go to sleep and wake up because they dreamed they were something. But the only two valid ways that one ascends to this office is either by designation or election. I want you to grab hold of that, because what this session is designed to do is this session is designed to make you critical. And many of you hear that word and maybe you think it's a negative word. But to be a critical thinker says that you are one who weighs the thought. You don't just hear one word and jump on it. You don't just hear one side and jump on it. You weigh it. And after you've weighed it, you understand that you must always come down on the side where there is the most weight. And the weightier matters are those matters that are birthed in truth. So there are only two ways to become a bishop. You either are designated, as your bishop has been, by the apostle of the denomination, the Reformation that you all are a part of, the fellowship, or election. Now, I want you to understand this. Election or designation both require the hand of another. So no man or woman can make themselves a bishop. I know your cousin is a bishop, and I know that you went to the service and they just simply said God told them they were a bishop, and they started having everybody call them a bishop, but that's not how you ascend to the episcopacy. You must ascend to the episcopacy by the hand of another, who in that process of ascension gives to you what is known as succession, commonly referred to as apostolic succession. By definition, apostolic succession is an unbroken stream that we know we can trace all the way back to Peter, the first bishop of the church, whose very appointment happens before our eyes in the narrative where Jesus is walking along the coast of a place called Caesarea Philippi. And he asks the question of his disciples, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they give their various answers, and somewhere along the way, Peter says, "I think I understand what you're asking us." Then Jesus says, "Who do you say that I, the Son of Man, am?" Or in interpretation, who are you telling them I am? Because a lot of what people think about your church and think about your leader is based upon what you say. That's why I encourage church members, when you're having a moment, learn to keep silent. Because if you ever have a moment, and you know, I thought about this thing. Some people, we have family and friends day, and they can never bring family and friends. You want to know why? Because it's what they've said about the church when they're having a moment. I'm just tired of everybody. Well, your family doesn't want to go to a place where they sense you have frustration. That's a whole nother lesson for a whole nother day. We see this playing out when Peter answers and says, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responds and says, "You're correct. As a matter of fact, you're so right, I want to change your name. I want to call you no more Simon, but Peter, Petros, or pebble. Upon this rock, I'll build my church. Upon this premise, upon this thought, this revelation. And I'm so glad he called him Peter and didn't call him something like boulder or stone or he called him pebble, which means you're just a small part of this. But on this, I'm going to build my church. If I get enough small parts and congeal them together, I'll build my church upon a rock of those who know me, who understand who I am and what I've been sent to do. So Peter has that distinction. He then rises in the ranks to become what we would refer to in this Latin phrase, Overseer Barrett, this Latin phrase called primus inter pares. That's Primus, inter I-N-T-E-R, pares, P-A-R-E-S, which simply means first among equals. Let me give you an example. Ketanji Brown Jackson, woo, 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 is sitting before the Senate and going through the process of being examined before she is appointed to the United States Supreme Court, before she is confirmed. She's already been appointed. Before she is confirmed by the Senate, the full Senate, she sits before the Judiciary Committee. And once she is confirmed, that same day, she will go to the White House and the president will swear her in, and she will become a part of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of the United States, 9 justices, and there is one person who is considered the Chief Justice. But if you study it, the Chief Justice is no more justice than the other 8. The only distinction is there is somebody who has to set the calendar. There is somebody who has rights and privileges to write a dissenting or an agreeing order for every case that comes before the court. But Chief Justice Roberts is no more a justice than is Sonia Sotomayor or any of the other justices on the Supreme Court, because he is only first among equals. I give that to you because I want you to understand the significance. Peter becomes first among equals. He does not become the chief apostle of the church. He is simply an apostle who ascends. Here's another point I want you to record in your notes because I believe that it is important. They were first apostles, then bishops. In our modern pattern, they are generally bishops who become apostles. One of the things that we are attempting to do is we teach and train around this country. I was in a session on the way here with a bishop who is being enthroned next month to the archiepiscopacy, or he is becoming an archbishop. And he said to me, Bishop Marshall, can you help me to defend what is happening to me? Because I have been an apostle and people are now telling me I'm taking a demotion by becoming an archbishop. I said to him, a lot of times people judge us out of their own ignorance. Ignorance meaning they simply don't know. And so as stewards of the faith, as leaders, we must be willing to teach where there is an absence of knowledge. An archbishop is no more a bishop than any other bishop. I need for you to grab hold of this because you will hear people make slide remarks to try to belittle the process. Again, this teaching is designed to make you very critical. So you will hear some things after you have been exposed to these various sessions that Bishop Designate McNair is providing for you. And one of the things that you will generally be exposed to is the inability of others to embrace nomenclature or etymology that they themselves do not understand. And because you sit in the house of a bishop, you need to be knowledgeable enough to at least correct the error. So an archbishop is no more a bishop than one who we would call an auxiliary bishop or a suffragan, S-U-F-F-R-A-G-A-N, not a suffering bishop. I was in a service one day and the lady said, we want to thank God for our suffering bishop. And I thought, that is a horrible place to be. A horrible place to be considered a suffering bishop. But a suffragan bishop, which is one who has rights of succession. A suffragan bishop is normally that bishop that's next in line. There are other terms like a coadjutor or coadjutor, as is commonly referred to. Then you hear terms like presiding bishop or presiding prelate. You hear terms like vice bishop. You may even hear terms like junior bishop. I cringe every time I hear it because I'm just not, as much as I think I know, I can't get that one. I don't know what a junior bishop is because you're either, a bishop or you're not. But you hear these terms, and I want you to grab them because a bishop is a bishop. In December, when your pastor is elevated, he is not being consecrated a diocesan bishop or jurisdictional bishop. Now, those may be his appointments, but that's not his consecration. He's consecrated a bishop. I've been a bishop for 29 years. In December, he will just begin his journey. But when we sit in a college or a house of bishops together, I'm no more a bishop than he is. He's no less a bishop than I am. Because consecration affirms either the designation or the election. I'm either boring y'all or you're getting this. Because y'all are looking like, what? Yeah. Tenure and time don't differentiate us after consecration. When he walked into the office this evening, I stood and greeted him and called him bishop. From the moment of designation, he is entitled to that title. From the moment of election, one can be called bishop. And so this idea of the historical ramifications of the office itself helps us to understand the significance and the needfulness of the office. Please write this down if you're taking notes. The church needs bishops. What did I just give you? The church needs bishops. And why does the church need bishops? Because the church needs oversight. Pastors need a pastor. Leaders need to be led. The church needs to establish its order. And it cannot establish its order if there is no one in charge. And we must be willing in this generation to address that. Please write this down. There must always be somebody in charge. Can't be just carte blanche. Can't be just everybody do what you want to do. Because the Bible says when there was no king, every man did what was right in his own eyes. Are you all getting this? Y'all feel like I'm not talking to you over here? I want to turn my body. Okay. So it is imperative that you get this. It is imperative that you understand this. 29 years I have been in this office. I didn't consecrate myself. I was consecrated in the organization to which I'd been born into. When I was consecrated, I felt at that particular time that I was too young for the office. 29 years later, I want you to absolutely know that I am clear that I was too young for the office, because this office requires maturation. And at 23, I was not mature. I was pastoring. At 23, I probably had about 300 members in my church, active every Sunday. But I was growing up with the people. And though I did not put this on myself, I had to learn to handle the weight of it. And one of the things that I missed in that process was my congregation was not prepared. My family was not prepared. My spouse was not prepared. Because no one took the time to teach us. They simply took our gifts and put us out there. And in essence said, figure it out on your own. And so when I get moments like this, I take it very seriously, because if you will undergird your bishop, he will be able to handle this office. So we're going to start this process tonight with this presentation. All that was introduction. Y'all ready? All right, let's jump into it. Number one, the bishop must have a mature church, because he cannot always be present. And if that disturbs you, if that bothers you, we're going to take these next 30, 40 minutes or so we have, and we're going to make sure you understand what that means. Because the bishop has an assignment. He is being consecrated by the apostle because there is need of him in the body. And though this house will always be priority to him, and you will always have his ear, his heart, his hand, I need for you to recognize and understand that the sign of the bishop's validation in the office is when his church, and I say that genderlessly, when his church is prepared for his absence. Please write that down. We don't want to keep our bishop local when he's been called to the nations. I didn't hear nothing. Let me try y'all one more time. He's been called to the nations. So he'll be with you at the assigned time. He'll be here, what is that, 5 o'clock on Sunday evenings? You'll see him, but what you can't do is keep him burdened with the pettiness of localness. Because if he's burdened with the pettiness of localness, he can't touch the world. He can't be effective in the field. He can't save other shepherds from sheep bites if he's been bitten at home. He's got to tend to his own wounds. If you are not clear about the fact that as he goes up, you must go up, please write this down, and you must grow up. So you are not as needy as those who sit in the house where their pastor's only responsibility is that local house. You are mature enough to know that if bishop is here, you must be in place. But if bishop is assigned elsewhere, you must also be in place. You don't take his absence as permission to be absent. You understand that if he is not here, I must press like never before, because folk are coming to the cathedral to see the bishop. And you know what happens when we do this right? No matter where he is, they always see him here. Because you become a reflection of him. You become a piece of him. Petros, a pebble. The world calls it a chip off the old block. But Jesus called it Petros, pebble. And upon this rock I'll build my church. So we must recognize the importance of this. I'm passionate about this moment because his success is going to be very much dependent upon that which you give him, how you undergird him. And I pray that the knowledge you receive, the information you receive, will cause you to be able to walk with such strength that he can walk and not worry about what is happening in the house. And so it is that this whole idea of the episcopacy in the 21st century becomes this. I want you to write these down. These are extremely important. It becomes this, that the bishop understands that he is assigned to the entirety of the body. Nothing worse than a messy bishop. Somebody who divides and not congeals. Nothing worse than someone who calls himself an apostle but don't have fellowship with nobody. How are you apostolic and you don't have no fellowship? When the apostles congeal the body. Come on, I love that word, because every time I hear congeal, it makes me think about Jell-O. I love some good Jell-O. Anybody else love some good Jell-O? Y'all don't like Jell-O? Y'all like good Jell-O? I love good Jell-O. What I like about Jell-O, it starts out as a liquid. But once you put it in its appropriate place, it becomes a solid. It changes its form. I'm older than everybody in this room, so let me kind of help y'all. When I was growing up, we used to watch cartoons on Saturday morning, and my favorite cartoon was the cartoons called The Super Friends. Had Batman, Robin, had Superman, had Wonder Woman. It had all of the, all of the popular ones, Aquaman. Yeah, y'all know. And then at what time they picked up these twins who were called the Wonder Twins. You don't know nothing about it. She act like she know about that. You know about the Wonder Twins? Well, then you know that the Wonder Twins were normal until they bumped fists. And they would say, Wonder Twin power, activate. And one of them would say, the form of an eagle. The other would say, the shape of a tornado. And they would become whatever they said. Apostles congeal the body. Bishops congeal the body. I'm going to tell you, your pastor is wealthy. He's a wealthy man. That's not because of the American Express card in his wallet. That's not because of the Jaguar that's sitting outside. That's not because of the home they live in. He's wealthy because he has relationships. And what we've got to understand is the necessity of relationships in this office. Because where there is no relationship, there is no future. I want y'all to grab this. Where there is no relationship, there is no future. And the bishop is a relationship builder. The bishop has a responsibility to bridge generations, to help those who are now have respect for those who were before them, without those who were before them being intimidated by those who were next. This thing called the episcopacy is very much about what I like to convince this generation and the generations to come is a byproduct of what the scripture says. Old men dreaming dreams and young men seeing visions. When the bishop is present, he helps the old man's dream and the young man's vision to meet somewhere in the middle, to become a synergistic experience where everything we need starts to happen as a result of agreement. Just tap somebody and tell them, that's why I talk to you in church. Yeah, when the preacher says touch your neighbor, the only reason I talk to you in church is because I know the power of agreement. Yeah, touch your neighbor and say so-and-so is not a fill-in for the preacher. It is a way for us to build agreement. And the agreement is necessary. The bishop helps us in the consensus building of agreement. So the bishop becomes that person who stands with that. Ignatius, the bishop of Antioch, wrote this. He wrote, "See that you follow the bishop even as Jesus Christ does the Father, and that the presbytery as ye would the apostles." In the Protestant church, everyone write that word down, Protestant. We are all a part of the Protestant church. Christianity only has two branches, Protestantism and Catholicism. So if you are not Catholic, you are Protestant. We are Protestants, though we are Pentecostal, though we have Pentecostal heritage and roots, though we have apostolic aura, we are Protestants. I want you to grab this because your coworkers will ask you, so what kind of church do you go to? And you need to understand that you are part of the Episcopal church. Yeah. Because you have an Episcopal form of church governance. That's Governance, governance. Are you all with me? All right. So there is a denomination called the Episcopal Church USA. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an Episcopal form of church governance. Let me help you because I want you to be able to understand this, and I think that this is very important. You ever heard of Baptist bishops? There are plenty of them now. But that alone is a contradiction. Because the Baptist church embraces a congregational form of church governance. The people vote, the people rule. The bishop does not wait on a vote. The bishop says, the people do. It's getting quiet. I don't like when it gets quiet. No, I really do. I really do. So Baptist bishops are automatically a contradiction. It's almost a dichotomous dissonance. Because what it does is it gives us two forms of church governance in one. And unless they can merge, there will always be conflict. We don't vote on what the bishop says. We simply do what the bishop, y'all ain't liking my teaching. Oh, no, we don't vote. Well, we need to vote on that, not in the bishop's house. Because in the bishop's house, we trust the words of the bishop. And we recognize that the bishop is a descendant of Peter. And Jesus so trusted Peter that he said, upon this rock, I will build my church. The church is the only institution that the gates of hell shall not prevail against. So it's got to be a powerful institution if hell can't breach it. And I'm telling you, the church will always win if the saints will not try to bring hell into the church. We bring hell into church when we try to make what the bishop tells us something that we put up for debate. We believe that the bishop has been in the presence of God. And as long as we know the bishop has been in the presence of God, when the bishop speaks, we hear him. And this is what Polycarp, one of the bishops of Smyrna, says. Polycarp says that the bishop should be revered as God. I didn't say worshiped, I said revered. Which means when the bishop walks in the room, we believe that the presence of God has been elevated. I know some of y'all are quiet because we'll stand up for the judge. They won't even have to say it loud. When the judge comes in, everybody gets up. I've seen some bad boys walk in the courtroom with their hats turned around backwards. And when the bailiff say remove the hat, they take it off because they respond to the authority. I've seen some very hardened criminals say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, to the judge. But we're in a generation where folk feel like they're equal to the bishop. We're in a generation now where we say things like he's a man just like I am. You're walking in error because the bishop has a responsibility to hear God for the faithful. This whole idea of the bishop and the congregational church. I'm not saying that I pastor a couple of Baptist bishops, but before consecration, I made sure that the church understood you're shifting the governance of this house. It's no longer the deacons in charge. Y'all ain't saying that. Y'all ain't saying that because some of y'all came from a church just like that. It's no longer the board in charge. Well, we have a board of directors. Then let the board be counsel to the bishop. But the board does not control the bishop. The bishop has wisdom enough to know in the multitude of counselors there is safety. But we don't tell the bishop what parts of the vision he can put in effect. No, we are followers because anything with more than one head is a freak. It's not normal. And so there must be within all of us an understanding of the bishop's position. Write this down if you're taking good notes. I must understand my place with the bishop. So there's got to be that kind of maturity where we recognize we don't just run up on the bishop. You request audience with the bishop. Well, I always just go in the office. Well, that's out of order. You don't have that right anymore. You ask permission. I ain't gonna teach like I want to teach, but you could start by asking the first lady, is this a good time? Is this a good time? If she says no, you don't ask no more questions. You know. Well, I'm going to talk to the adjutant. You don't bypass the first lady to go to an adjutant. You got to respect the order of the episcopacy. One of the things, am I teaching all right? Is my time up yet? Okay. One of the things that we've got to recognize is if you disrespect who the bishop sends, you've disrespected the bishop. Well, I got to hear it from bishop. No. If I'm his emissary, if I'm the one he has assigned, you hear it from me. And the way you handle me proves the level of respect you have for the bishop. I don't understand this generation who will talk down the adjutants when they come with a message from the bishop. Let me go ahead and try to teach this because bishops have adjutants. Pastors have armor bearers. Okay. The adjutancy is a military term that helps us to understand the significance of ranking and order. So if the bishop sends an adjutant, you honor the presence of the adjutant as if the bishop is there. Well, I got to hear it from bishop. You're out of order. Because if you can't hear it from the emissary, you miss the respect you should have for the bishop. It becomes imperative that we know how to receive the bishop. Everybody, write this down. In the 90s, when we went to this new order of praise and worship, pastoring during that time, I recognized how difficult it was, especially in the African American Pentecostal church, because we were used to doing devotion and testimony service. And I can remember many times somebody would be up testifying and the bishop would come in and everybody would stop, stand, receive the bishop, and then the person would go back to their testimony. Now that we are in this era where we worship corporately, and I love it, most of the time we are standing already when the bishop enters. But if we are ever in those sessions, in those moments where the bishop comes into the room, everything should stop so that we might receive the bishop. Now, if you're sitting here saying that's a whole lot and that just seems like it's too much, I want you to really put into perspective this whole point that I dealt with earlier called precedence. Because if the government respects it, if bishop is called to the state capitol downtown and he is invited to offer the prayer, and at that occasion, there would be senators, both U.S. senators and North Carolina state senators. And during that occasion, there would be, let's say Prince Charles comes to Raleigh from England. He is the successor to Queen Elizabeth, if she don't outlive him, because mother is determined to live and not die. So, I'm not prophesying, I'm just saying. She is 98, 97, something along those lines. Her mother lived to be 102. So she's got history on her side. But let's say Prince Charles is there, and let's say that he brings with him one of his nephews who would be considered a prince. He would be an HRH, His Royal Highness or Her Royal Highness. When they line everybody up in the receiving room, the government says that the bishop is lined up with the prince. in front of the senators, in front of the Secretary of State. If the government sees this office, we should see it also. Because the bishop, write this down, is God's representative in the earth, sent to keep the church alive until the return of our Lord. Jesus is talking to his disciples one day, and he starts teaching, and a lot of people miss this revelation because they think that he's just enjoying nature. But this is what he says. He says, foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man have nowhere to lay his head. The only place the Son of Man wants to lay his head is on top of the body. I'm going to try y'all one more time, because that was good. The only place he wants to lay his head is on top of the body. That's why I have problems with this group of people who want Christ without his church. Because his head sits on top of his body. And I know you got cousins. I'm just as saved as you are. I just don't need the church. There's something wrong with that level of salvation. Because he sits his head on top of the body. We are the body of Christ. And it is the bishop who keeps us in order. I'm going to tell y'all something. The church will always be essential. Even when we had to shut our doors for a season during the pandemic, the church did not lose its essentiality. Tell you something else, the church was never designed not to meet. If you look at the history of the practices of the apostles, long before there were churches, the church met in the house. So the church was always designed to meet. Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. So there is always need for there to be the church, the body. This is why a few years ago the Lord told me to stop serving communion every first Sunday. He said because the saints had begun to take it too lightly. And then he gave me the revelation of what the scripture says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. It said, as oft as ye do it in remembrance of me. And then he says, be careful how you do it. Because for this cause are many weak among you, and some sleep, because they did not appropriately discern the Lord's body. I'm tired of watching people take communion and act like they're so happy, but walk by me and won't speak. I'm the body of Christ. And if you mishandle me, you mishandled the body. Y'all ain't talking back to me. The blessed quietness, holy. Take this wine, take this juice, and then get all tore up and crying and ain't got no fellowship with your brothers and sisters. How you love communion and don't love the saints? How you want to embrace communion and don't want to embrace the saints? We need the bishop. We need the bishop to help us to understand this. The bishop sets correction. Please write that down. You're already in a house where there's a leader, but the bishop sets correction. Correction. You don't want to be corrected? It's going to be rough to be in the bishop's house. So the bishop has this responsibility. I don't know what the process is for the catechumenal training for Bishop Designate McNair and Bishop Designate Blandon. But the bishop needs a time of consecration prior to the consecration. You will be key to that because at least 40 days out, you're going to make sure there are no issues. I didn't hear nobody say nothing. Maybe that's because everybody was writing. Yeah, because we need for the bishop to get prepared and the house needs to be prepared. All right, so let me give you these things and then we will move forward and I'll take a few questions. I think I'm probably coming up on my time. Is it okay if I stop right at about 9? Will that be good? Okay. All right. So the Cathedral Church, everybody lift your hand and say, that's us. That's us. I work in the church. I'm a full-time pastor. I've been a full-time pastor for 32 years. I started a nonprofit in 2020, and it's called the Racial Accountability Cohort because I just believe that a lot of what we've been talking about around racism has to be confrontational. And so when I started working, and some of you all deal with this every day because you work in the marketplace, but it was shocking to me when I got emails, and at the end of the email, people put these pronouns. He, him. And I got she, her. So I asked my wife, I was like, I wonder why people are doing this. My wife works in corporate America, and she said, oh, those pronouns help to define them, primarily their gender definitions. So, of course, that intrigued me. And I bring all of that up because when I talk about the Cathedral Church, I want you to put, that's me, that's us, we are it. You are the Cathedral Church, all right? Now, understand this, you're not the headquarters, but you are the Cathedral Church because there can only be one headquarters. One headquarters. Just like for your fellowship, there's only one Jerusalem. It's in Farmville. It's in Farmville. All right. So the bishop designate has to be surrounded by the right people in this season. Let me talk to the Cathedral Church so that you will know what your responsibility is. First of all, you must commit yourselves to serious prayer and fasting for your bishop. You don't want him to go into this without being covered in prayer. You're going to get all of the good teaching and training at some point with your catechesis, and they're going to teach you about the garments and all of that. That's not my assignment. My assignment is to get the house ready for the ascension of your leader so that you are ready. Where are the armor bearers and adjutants of this house? Stand up. Those of you who are armor bearers and adjutants. You become key to this process because your responsibility is to cover them, to serve them. You can't serve them if you don't know what you should be doing. And this is not an adjutancy class, but it's so that they'll understand your role. That your role is very much about protecting the sacredness of the office. Everybody write that down. The office itself is sacred. So you cannot have people handling the sacredness of the office who don't understand the sanctity. I teach adjutants and train adjutants and always tell them your job is to sanctify the leader in the eyes of the people. Some y'all been taught. Look at them. I mean, they throwing this out. I don't run into that very often. I like this. You sanctify the leader in the eyes of the people. So sometimes you turn people away, not because you don't like them personally. You turn people away because you don't want them to see him when he's not prepared. You don't open the door till he's ready. You don't expose him. I was several months ago called up to New Jersey to help with the funeral of a bishop and the funeral of, a bishop's wife. And I knew after arriving that I would be dealing with this grief on the bishop. And so the night before, we prepared the adjutants that when the bishop walked up to the bier of his wife, that they were to turn their backs, lock their arms, and cover him, so that the people wouldn't see him grieve openly. He grieved and cried and stood up and turned around and saw it. He didn't expect it, and he said to me afterwards, "Who taught them to do that?" He said, "Because I felt something. I felt for just a few moments like I was in the room by myself." That's what adjutancy is about. It's about making the bishop safe enough that he can do what he's been assigned to do. Y'all ain't gonna say nothing. That's why we cover the bishop. You all can sit down. The adjutancy is important because you protect the bishop, but you also protect the bishop's garments. I'm a presiding bishop, and I'm a little more traditional than most. So whenever I'm in house, in my pulpit, my staff, my crozier stands. It's there all the time when I'm in house. If they have worship and I'm not in house, my crozier is removed, which says the cathedral is open, but the bishop is not here. It gives distinction. Again, what did I teach earlier? They're going to see the bishop every time they come to the cathedral because you are a reflection of the bishop. But the crozier denotes that the bishop is not in residence. The same is with the royal standard over Buckingham Palace. When the queen is present, the royal standard flies. When the queen is up in Balmoral or on a trip somewhere, it's taken down. And so the house has to prepare itself for its responsibility to serve with the bishop. Please write that down. Serve. I'm here to serve with the bishop. I don't have a problem serving the bishop, but I'm here to serve with the bishop. Because those who are called to this cathedral church, you have that responsibility to serve with the bishop so that the bishop's job is made easier. I'm going to stop there. And is it okay if I give a moment for any questions? I want to give a moment. I know I've thrown out a lot in this time that we've had. Is there anything that you feel I need to bring any clarity to? Because I want my presence here to matter tonight. I pray it matters. I pray you've heard something you needed. Any questions, any comments, any points of clarity? Anyone? Okay. All right. You all have a great leader. When he is vested and adorned in his garments in December, it's a moment that's going to also change your life. This is what Elijah said to Elisha. If you see me when I'm taken up, you can get what you've requested of me. I want you all to understand something. As he ascends, so do you. That's why your presence at the consecration, at the convocation, is going to be so key. Because if you see him when he goes up, we have erroneously taught people that mantles are only released at death. That's not true. Mantles are released whenever our leaders go higher. And that's what's happening here at Mount Moriah, Raleigh. Your leader is going higher. My question tonight is, who's ready to go up with him? If you are, just lift your right hand. If you're here tonight and you're ready to go up with him, lift your hand real high so he'll know. You're ready for the elevation. You're ready for what God is doing in him and through him. Can I say this to you? You're being elevated. I speak this prophetically. You guys have got to start to look for elevation in every area of your life. Between now and consecration, some of y'all going to be called into the office by your supervisor and given jobs that you didn't even think you qualified for. Because when he goes up, you go up. Some of you are going to be able to upgrade your house. Some of you are going to move that business from an idea to a concept. You're going to move it from the trunk of your car, from the basement of your house to your own storefront. It's impossible for elevation to hit his life and then not hit the house. I want you to also pray for the First Lady. She's on this whirlwind journey with her husband, pastoring 2 churches, leading in the denomination, both of them called and anointed, having their own itinerant assignments. Can you imagine what it's like when they just get home and they can just look at each other and just be regular people? Let me tell you, they never just get to be regular people. They always are who they are. So you got to pray for them. Pray for their children. Pray for their families. Because this elevation means something. Everybody point your hand toward Bishop. Only Apostle McNair can pass to him apostolic succession. But I want you to pass to him a blessing tonight. I want you to encourage his heart by taking these next few seconds and praying for your leader.